So I am grateful to be here today and honored to be part of such an esteemed panel of women seeking justice for women and girls. I'm grateful for all of you who decided to make this kind of commitment to be here to learn with us and to offer your ideas and suggestions and passion for the work that we have ahead of us. I came into this work in public policy advocacy and organizing as an educator, trained as an educator to work with people who are engaged in the community. And one of the things that I became concerned about is that most of the work that I saw being done was focused on women and girls after they'd been injured. And the question I had was, why is it that injury at all has to happen to women and girls? So the question we began asking is, what would the church look like if women and girls were seen as children of God with sacred work? I'm going to say that one more time. What would the church and the world look like if women and girls were seen as children of God with sacred work? Women and girls are subjected to disproportionate levels of exploitation, abuse, poverty, disenfranchisement, because we're not seen as valuable beyond our sexuality. Women have power. We were created in the image of God, and so at our birth, we have power. We just have to use our power differently, right? We have to navigate systems of oppression. We have to mitigate harm being done to us and our children. Abusive interpersonal relationships and unfair treatment, cultural practices and norms, institutional policies and business practices at every level of society, including between some nations, continue to deny women and children sacred work and perpetuate gender inequality. So our mandate as people of faith is to interrupt and end systems of oppression, individually, culturally, and institutionally, both private sector and public sector. Oppression is discrimination times power. So we have to work to transform the cultural messages and teachings that perpetuate the inequity, because oppression breeds vulnerability. I have two daughters that are 8 and 11, and I'm conscious every day of the messages they are given throughout our society that tell them they are not as valuable, and the intentionality it takes to demonstrate to them that they aren't as valuable as everybody else. But there's a lot that I have to deprogram. There's a documentary that we've been using a lot called Not My Life about victims of labor and sex trafficking. One of the quotes from the film that has stuck with me and continues to stay with me is the idea that, and the truth, that traffickers fish in pools of vulnerability. And so if oppression breeds vulnerability, we've got to deal with the oppression. So I'd ask you to take a minute, or a few seconds rather, if we don't have that many minutes, to identify where are the places in your community where there are pools of vulnerability. What do those look like? Some of the factors that create vulnerability I've listed above, and they are intersectional. I don't want to say that they are independent from one another. I don't believe they are, but I do think it's important that we name them. Sexism, poverty, sexual and gender-based violence, war and conflict, climate change, media, cultural images, and beliefs that promote internalized oppression. One of the initiatives that I'm working on and grew out of my passion for my daughters, one of the things we discovered when my daughter was 3 years old is that she was entering into the age of media, much more than I could control. She would go to school and come home singing songs of shows that I did not let her watch. So we had begun doing this, but even more intentionally, identifying shows where girls were protagonists, where children's books where girls were in leadership positions, and there aren't that many. And so the idea that a girl is going to grow up understanding herself as a leader when that's not modeled and that's not being something actively taught, I think is a really big challenge and assumption. Women make up 50% of the world's population. And yet, we own only 1% of the world's wealth. there anything else we need to say about poverty? Women and girls must have access to education, employment, entrepreneurial opportunities that are both income and wealth generating. There's a difference, right, between income and wealth. I am proud that my tradition has been working on economic justice issues since 1908. And so this is a statement of the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1908 Social Creed, which you will name. The ideas up here are not radical, but they still persist. The abolition of child labor, regulation of conditions that women are able to thrive and be healthy in our communities. I'm going to actually read the language of the document since I'm saying it. For such regulation of conditions for labor for women as shall safeguard the physical and moral health of the community. For the suppression of the sweating system, for the gradual and reasonable reduction of the hours of labor to the lowest practical point, with work for all, and for that degree of leisure, for all which is the condition of the highest human life. We, United Methodists, will not rest until what we believe is God's vision for the world is realized. Sexual and gender-based violence, you've heard many different people name this, right? From domestic violence, war and conflict, rape as a weapon of war, female genital mutilation, child marriage. Misguided religious morality often reinforces stigma and blame regarding rape, domestic violence, gender identity, disability, and sexually transmitted diseases like HIV and AIDS. A significant consequence of sexual and gender-based violence is that trust is broken, and sacred trust, including our Christian communities. And what can happen is that it leads to more distrust and violence. So for an example, a woman's inability to bear a child, or a teenager's odor from fistula, formed in a prolonged labor, or her HIV status can have her kicked out of the community, removed. All of those are status and grounds for divorce, and I'm very grateful that the Fistula Foundation is here with us today. At the same time, traditional beliefs such as child marriage and female genital mutilation are reinforced by traditional leadership in mandatory cultural practice. So we must work at all levels of government to pass and enforce laws that stop sexual assault and gender-based violence. One example that we spend a lot of time working on is labor and sex trafficking. It's a $150 billion industry, 21 million people enslaved. There's a lot of focus on the supply and rescuing people that are being trafficked, and I am all for that. I also want each of us to ask, what is my role in lessening demand? What is my role in creating demand? Am I supporting industries that are perpetuating the demand for cheap slave labor? Ensuring access to family planning. By this we mean that women and girls should have the ability for healthy timing and spacing of pregnancy. We know that 225 million women say that they want access to reproductive health care but don't have it. Girls younger than ages 15 years old are 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy than those over 20. So the leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-old girls is pregnancy. 1 million girls around the world suffer from obstetric fistula. Obstetric fistula, for those of you who don't know, and I encourage you to the Freedom from Fistula Foundation, you see the banner over there and colleagues over here, is a hole between the vagina and rectum or bladder that is caused by prolonged obstructed labor. So my 2 girls who were 8 and 11 years old, if they lived in a place where they were expected to be married, or where they were being trafficked and sexually assaulted and became pregnant, neither of them is anatomically developed enough for a baby to pass through the birth canal. And so in that process of a baby trying to get out of the birth canal, a fistula is rubbed, leaving the girl or the woman incontinent. the demoralization and the violence perpetrated, right, as a result of another practice of violence is something we cannot ignore. Ultimately, we've got to be, as Roma said, this is about society, not just about women and girls. We need to be focused on building a world that is focused on collaboration rather than domination. So as we engage in the work of women's rights and girls' rights, we also need to be working with our boys and men to talk about healthy masculinity. What does it mean to be a strong man who is loving and kind and listens and does not perceive his role as someone to dominate a woman? It's beautiful. You all know men like that, but that's not the model that's upheld. In our media, it's not the law. It's not the model that's upheld in many of our societies. Right? It's the kind of man that someone is supposed to be. There are studies that say that boys at age 12 learn that the only emotion that they are allowed to exhibit is that of anger. And we tend to be okay with that if it's in the proper realm. But so many times, it is not. It ends up in violence against women and girls. One of the things I think about in terms of, and I think about this, and so I call them in as allies. As a woman, as a white woman in the United States, I benefit tremendously from my privilege as a white woman. And if I am committed to racism being eradicated, I have to be committed to do my own individual work to be an anti-racist person in all that I do. I also have to challenge systems and corporations and businesses so that they also are committed to anti-racist policies. So my brothers and sisters, that is the work that we have to do together. It is eliminating oppression toward women and girls, but it really is about eliminating oppression and working together so that, as the song, I did not know this, there's a song for the movie Selma called Glory by, oh my goodness, by Common and John Legend, right? And in one of the parts it says, when all of the battles are won. And listening to it, I imagine the word as spelled as W-O-N. As you look at the lyrics, it is O-N-E. That we are all connected to one another. We have to be connected to one another. And we've got to be about eradicating violence and oppression because it breeds vulnerability.